Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Christy McDonald. Full show coming up for you. This weekend, Republicans are heading up north for the Mackinac Republican Leadership Conference. Happens every 2 years and there's plenty to talk about, including state support for President Trump, the idea of party inclusion, and the 2018 midterm elections. We'll debate the future of Michigan Republicans and some of the conflicting messages about where the party is headed. Also coming up, are we looking at some big challenges ahead when it comes to the state budget? We'll have an in-depth look at one report that outlines some tough times and decisions that will have to be made. And finally, turning Detroit neighborhoods, headlines, and history into a powerful theater experience. You'll meet the Castech students who are doing just that. It's all coming up for you on MiWeek, so let's bring in our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. And we're going to start off with the Republicans heading to Mackinac Island this week and why this gathering could show us a lot about the party's future here in Michigan and really around the country. It's good to see you guys. All right, so Nolan, are you going up to Mackinac this weekend?
I'm headed up.
He's going.
There you go.
Sending someone from my staff. I am not going this year.
Nancy
Kaffir will be there this year.
I'll bring you a big box of fudge.
All right, well, we'll expect that when you come back, but we expect a little bit of insight, too, also, in looking at, you get all Republicans in one place up there on Mackinac Island. I'm going to start with you, Nolan, first. How would you characterize where the Republican Party in Michigan kind of stands right now in terms of power structure and where they're headed in philosophy?
Well, I think the Republican Party in Michigan is a lot better organized and more aligned than it is perhaps on a national level. Chairman Ron Weiser has gotten a tremendous fundraising effort going. They've got as much money or more than they had in the last cycle. They've got a good list of candidates lined up for most races. They're struggling a little with the Senate race, but that may clarify. I think they feel that they're okay. I think they feel like they're going to be okay.
Do you see some cracks, though, or some division, though? Do you still have the people who are never Trump people? Or is President Trump divided kind of where the philosophy is with the Republican Party right now?
Well, I mean, I think he's highlighted a schism that exists not just in the party, but in the country. And the Republican Party has a different burden, I guess, than the Democratic Party does in adapting to that schism. The Republican Party is not growing its base with the demographic change that is happening around the country. That's what they said in 2012 when they lost the presidential contest. They said that they needed to turn toward Latinos and African Americans and people who traditionally do not vote for Republican candidates. They've gone way off the rails there at the national level, less so at the state level, but those are the kind of things that could start to show up in the next year's gubernatorial contest, for example.
You look at their Senate lineup. They got 2 African Americans running for Senate. I don't think at the state level diversity is necessarily the issue.
It's not diversity.
And all of those things, you've got to remember, they cleaned up in 2016.
They did.
Now 2018 will be a midterm election. They're running against some very traditional challenges. Midterms are always hard for the party in power. This time you're running against running with a president who has the lowest popularity ratings we've ever seen, and that's going to make it tougher for Republicans. The big variable here is always you're running against somebody, what the other side does. And if state Democrats turn themselves over to the Bernie Sanders wing of that party, I think it'll throw everything into disarray.
I want you to comment on the fact that Nolan said, well, you have African American candidates, but how do you equate that with
what Republicans always say? So Bob Young, who is one of the African American candidates who's announced, doesn't represent I don't know, but even 30% of what most African Americans feel about policy. He's a fine public servant, someone I actually like personally, but he's not representative of African Americans.
He'd get 30% of African Americans. He wins that election.
He would love that, right?
I mean,
he'll get 10%.
He's not running as a Democrat. And John James, the young man.
But part of the problem with the Republican Party is that they do constantly trot out these folks who say, look, I'm African American and I'm Republican, and they don't deal with the fundamental disconnect between the fortunes of African Americans and Latinos and Republican politics. You have a president in the White House who is openly hostile to both populations, has done and said things.
So what did
Africa? Well, okay. So how would you answer that, Nolan? How would Republicans counter that?
First, let me ask: what did African Americans do in the last election? They stayed home. So neither party is doing a very good job.
Well, Democrats are another issue.
Of
right,
appealing
no
to.
I'm not saying that they're doing a great job either.
What I think Republicans need to do to prevail in 2018, at least not to lose steam, is stick to a growth message. Jobs, jobs, jobs. You saw Bill Schuette coming out right away talking jobs, 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 growth for the state. We are not going to tax our way out of problems. We got to grow our way out of the problems. I think voters understand that. They're looking for a positive economic message, which is what they're looking for in most elections.
Do you think they're going to run into a problem, though, coming up with some of the policies that President Trump has come forward to in an increased, maybe Democratic base that's looking to show up?
So, I mean, it's really hard to predict what is going to happen in American politics right now, but all of the signals right now show or would suggest that you're going to have an increased Democratic turnout next year. That turnout is going to be angry about some of the things that Donald Trump has said and done. And Republicans in the state are going to have to contend with that in some way. They're going to have to deal with social issues like immigration, like racial justice that typically don't show up in state contests in Michigan historically, but I think they will be on the front burner.
Again, they can't run to get Democratic votes because they're never going to get Democratic votes.
But you got to have Democratic votes to win.
You know, you may be looking at a 2010 style election where an angry electorate just wiped out everybody. You don't know what factor Trump's going to play in the election. I couldn't tell you. I know what I'm going to be looking for up there is how these potential candidates position themselves with Trump. Do they run full-throated with Trump, or do they try to sort of nuance their message? I heard one potential candidate tell me the other day that, well, she's going to say, I support the policies, not necessarily some of his messages. I think it's going to be a struggle for a lot of people, and depending on the district, of course, and depending what they're running for, to manage that challenge.
Well, we expect a full report from both of your papers.